If there's one thing that entrepreneurs are good at, it is being innovative and adapting. You have to have that ability to act in the now and think ahead. You're the one that has to make decisions right now based on the best information you have, but then you ask what I call the what next questions. What do I need to think about next? What do I need to plan for next? And what do I need to do next? If you as the entrepreneur aren't asking yourself the what next question, who is?
When everything goes haywire and what you do will define your future. And we all want to believe that we would show up the way you did. So tell us how to make sure that happens.
Jeff, I think the number one thing you have to look at is the reason you train and do things and practice things a certain way, and you have that infusion of integrity in all that you do, is because when that moment comes, if you have trained in a variety of ways, if you change the circumstances so that you aren't going to do things continuous, and let's face it, if there's one thing that entrepreneurs are good at, it is being innovative and adapting. And you have to have that ability to recognize that a circumstance is changing. And it's what I like to call, you have to act in the now and think ahead. You're the one that has to make decisions right now based on the best information you have, but then you ask what I call the what next questions. What do I need to think about next? What do I need to plan for next? And what do I need to do next? Because when you start thinking that way, what you're actually doing is you're pushing your timeline out. So when those things happen that are unpredictable, that you cannot foresee, and you have to fall back on your training and every experience that you have learned throughout a lifetime, when you start asking those what next questions, that's what's going to start defining your ability to now make decisions on the cuff based upon that lifetime of things you've gone through. And that ability to act in the now while thinking ahead. Because if you as the leader, if you as the entrepreneur aren't asking yourself the what next question, who is? No one will be. And next thing you know, the timeline's going to collapse right up in front of your face. And then you're going to be compressed to where you're either going to get brain lock or you're not going to be able to make the decisions rapid enough. You have to constantly be pushing that timeline out. And guess what? It is going to be mentally intensive. It is going to be physically demanding. You are not going to get sleep. You're going to have to think on your feet, but you also have to make sure that you're taking care of your people at the same time.
Man, that is just so true. You know, this idea of, I mean, that I say it's true. That really resonates with me based on my experience, particularly under not true mortal danger, but what feels like clear and present danger in business that I've experienced a couple of times. That idea of building out the model and the projection in your mind as a way of extending time and creating space so that you don't end up in a completely reactive and paralyzed frame of mind.
Absolutely. The one thing I'd tell people is don't ask yourself the question, how did we get here? Right. That is irrelevant to where you are.
That's looking in the wrong direction, right?
Yeah, it doesn't matter how you got there. You're there. Now, what do you need to do? And what is the best way forward?
Amen. Ask what next. We frankly started to get going before I even hit record. And I was like, oh, wait, I gotta record and do an intro. But yeah, let's dive back in. You were talking about, we were actually talking about how you met Philip Stutz, who was previously on my show. My audience knows Philip, who connected us. And you were saying that you used to work in a military, a service members organization, and you kind of got on a riff about national security policy, and I didn't want to lose any steam. So can you pick that back up? Because it was gold.
Absolutely. I looked at it as when I retired from the military and decided what to do next. Unlike a lot of my peers who I don't fault, I chose not to go into the defense contracting world, but struck out on my own. And about a year and a half after retirement, I became associated with a veteran service organization that really, a lot of them like to do benefits. And this one was unique because they dealt in national security policy. They wanted to work with Capitol Hill and try and create and shape the policies that ultimately those young men and women that I mentioned that go out there and serve and defend our freedom, they're the ones impacted by it. So being able to craft and shape policy from the beginning is really going to help guide how our nation employs the military, where we employ them, and the investments that we make. And obviously, I think Americans have seen the result of that over the past 3 months, as we have done the withdrawal from Afghanistan, as we've made investments around the world. And there's a lot of people have really questioned, why are we in certain places? Should we really be involved in this thing called nation building? But to me, national security policy is really at the forefront of everything that impacts us. And, as we reflect back, you look at 9/11 this past week or so ago. And, on that morning, Jeff, when you think about it, Americans that day, they didn't care about their stock portfolio. They didn't care about what went on at work or the argument they may have had with their boss that week before. That morning, they really cared about two things. Is my family safe? And is my country safe? Nothing else mattered. And that's really why I look at it, especially through that lens of national security following the attack on USS Cole, because it undergirds everything that our nation does, our economy, our businesses, our society, because if you don't feel safe as a nation, nothing else can happen.
Yeah, that's interesting. And it's ironic because in the aftermath of that attack, we were probably the safest we had been or have been in a long time because we came together as a nation. And that's actually that's real national security, is a united populace who's unified. It feels like right now in our country, regardless of external threats, I think the average person on the street generally doesn't feel safe right now because we aren't we're kind of divided against ourselves, it seems like. And it always seems to take these events to shake. It's almost like this. I mean, I don't know. I'm not a great historian, but it seems like there's these cycles of people getting caught in their minutia and their fractious little opinions about life and gradually sort of, becoming aggressive and almost like rabid. And then something happens and we all go, oh crap, we're in this together. We can't live without each other.
I think you're exactly right, Jeff. I think when you really look at it today, a lot of the division that you see in our country is more driven by how the media shapes perception of how other people think than the reality of who we are as Americans, what we stand for, and what we believe in. Because if you were to take an average group of Americans and sit them down in a room and not tell them about their party and start discussing some of the major issues, I think you'd be very surprised. And I think most Americans would be surprised that they believe in the same things. There are probably differences in how we want to achieve it, but that's always been the hallmark of living in a republic based on democratic principles. And that's how we evolve as a nation. We have this enduring document called the Constitution. And that really, when you look at that document that has held us together for this long and continues to guide our nation, I think we're a lot closer than people give themselves credit for. So stop wearing your emotions on your sleeve and realize that Americans, we have a lot in common, a lot to be thankful for. And I think we have a much brighter future than people give themselves credit for.
Amen to that. Much brighter future. Certainly, there's no money in publishing news about how good things are.
Exactly.
Right? You don't get the viewership, so you can't sell the ads, right?
Controversy sells. They look at what these people are doing. And in fact, there's much more in common than there are apart. But if you always emphasize the differences, if you always emphasize the bad things, everybody thinks that it's all got to be about getting just that little bit more power, that one more vote in Congress, that one more justice on the Supreme Court. It's not like that. Because we as Americans want certain things, certain values to be enshrined in the fabric of who we are as a society, and make sure that we hold those things dear.
So in the spirit of holding those things dear, can you go back to, I want to go back even pre USS Cole, right? I want to go back Commander Kirk. You graduated from the Navy, I think, or from the Naval Academy in 1981.
I did. Graduated in 1981 and picked surface warfare, which is being on Navy ships around the world as my functional area, where some get aviation or submarines. I picked ships that morning.
So you're boats that can shoot stuff at each other, basically, and shoot stuff in the sky and shoot stuff under the water.
We tend to call them ships. I mean, boats are what we carry for little guys to transfer around back and forth. But yeah, being on Navy ships, those really are the guardians of our freedom. Because when you think about it, when 2/3 of the earth is covered by water, and when you look at you have what's called the sea lanes of communication, and what those really are is those are the routes that shipping takes to ensure that the economies of the world can trade with each other, that countries have interactions with each other. And what we do as a Navy is we go out there and we safeguard those sea lanes. We make sure that countries are able to be out there and they, in fact, can have the communication with each other through their economies to allow businesses to flourish, to allow for societies to understand how each other work. Because when you have economic interest, things begin to build from that. And that's really one of the great things about our country is that the United States, people talk about nation building. The best way we do nation building is by example. We should be that vanguard for freedom by being out there, by being proactive, and by setting the example that other countries want to live up to, that they want to emulate.
Well, yeah, it's interesting, talking about safeguarding freedom. And I think this is really a lesson for, those of us here in the United States who I think generally don't, if you haven't traveled a lot, you probably don't appreciate how good you have it here, frankly. But also just as a general, really, this ties in even with what I do for a living in teaching entrepreneurship and evangelizing entrepreneurship, is that the foundation of freedom really is economic prosperity. When you have mutually aligned economic interests, you have the incentive for countries to not do what they tend to do sometimes in the absence of economic incentive, which is start to bully each other, start to get imperialist or territorial or whatever. Like, countries that play nice together are countries that trade well together.
Absolutely. When you look at those economic interests, they drive a lot. And, when you think about how the Navy operates, the ability for naval officers or that Navy mindset to fit into the economy, into entrepreneurship, really, the parallels are amazing. We have a great saying in the Navy called UNODIR, okay? UNODIR. And we can start messages where you tell your boss, unless otherwise directed, this is what I intend to do. And when you think about it, what do entrepreneurs do? Hey, unless somebody tells me I can't do it, then why can't I do it? And they go out there. They're the ones that lean forward. They're the ones that press the envelope of what's possible. They're the ones that create new products, new inventions, new ways of doing things. And naval officers love to do that. If you tell me I can't do it, that's one thing. But if you haven't told me that yet, until you tell me stop, boy, I'm going to try something new. And that's what makes the United States Navy have this incredible degree of strength, because we're willing to assume that dirty 4-letter word that everyone likes to not touch, and that's called risk. And the Navy embraces risk. They define it, they control it as much as possible, but we are willing to live with it, whereas a lot of people are not.
Yeah, you think about it, you're an entire, like basically the equivalent of a really large corporation where all of your offices are floating on water. And yet we're all, bipedal land creatures. Like your entire existence is risk. Like you're not on land. For goodness sakes, get on some land already. But no, we're just going to hang out on the water and hope nothing goes wrong. Like it is pretty amazing.
A Navy ship like USS Cole, a guided missile destroyer. Think about it like this, if you want to put it in terms of a company. I am a $1+ billion corporation. I have a crew, a team of over 300 people. I have a multi-million-dollar budget, around $25 million a year to conduct operations. And when you fold in everything else, I'm probably closer to $50 million. I have human resources that I need to take care of. I have people, spaces, and equipment that I need to make sure run and operate exactly. We have safety programs that are involved. So the entire thing is you have a small little Fortune 5,000 company here, if not even a Fortune 500 company, because I'm $1 billion. And if you fold that out to an aircraft carrier, now you're talking a $20 billion asset when you put on the air wing, and you've got 5,000 people, and you've got that $250 million a year budget that you're running with them. It is absolutely amazing when you consider payroll and everything that goes into it. Each of these Navy ships is an independent entity that runs on their own, but can very, very easily integrate and work together as an aircraft carrier strike group. And that is one of the great things, that while we're independent businesses, we can come together and form one cohesive unit that projects U.S. power around the world in order to safeguard our national security interests and our economic interests as a result.
That is pretty crazy. So I got to ask, so 1981, you're commissioned, you choose surface warfare. How many people each year would you say choose that career path? Hey, I'm a commissioned officer in the Navy and I'm going to be on these types of ships.
Great question. Normally, you'll have a class coming out of the Naval Academy of around 900. These days, it may be a touch more. But out of that 900, probably around half the class is going to end up going surface warfare. And then everything else gets spread out between aviation, submarines. You'll get a percentage that is going to go Marine Corps. You get a number that go into the specialty fields like special operations, the SEALs, into the intelligence community, the supply community. But let's face it, the Navy operates from ships. Ships are what makes it go. And that's really what we have to fill out and make sure is out there on the high seas, safeguarding our freedoms.
So you've got, let's say 450, 500 people a year going into surface warfare from 1981 to, let's see, when did you become commanding officer of the Cole?
It was an 18-year process. And that's one of the unique things. I served on a variety of ships in positions. You know, I started out on a tank landing ship as a division officer. And from there, I went and served on a second ship, an Aegis guided missile cruiser. I literally came up on the 5-year point and went to Navy postgraduate school, got my master's degree out at Monterey, California. From there, I actually commissioned the very first Aegis guided missile destroyer, USS Arleigh Burke. And from that, I went out to the Army's Command and General Staff College to learn how do the other services think, how do they do things. So I was in the flatlands there in Kansas. So I did get my touch on land there.
All right.
And then back out to sea as an executive officer on a guided missile cruiser out of San Diego. Then I worked for the Secretary of the Navy for 2.5 years as his administrative aide, making sure that every piece of paper that came across his desk was going to properly represent the Navy before he signed it. And then I was given that ultimate gift of command where my Navy and my nation entrusted me to be able to take that $1 billion national asset and go forward. And part of the reason why the Navy waits as long as they do is like anything else, and including in business. They look at it and say, it takes 17, 18 years of experience to get 17 to 18 years of experience. And you want to give people time to have that depth of knowledge, to have seen a lot of things. By the time I took command of USS Cole, I had 10 years of at-sea experience. So I had more time at sea than I did ashore. And that truly made a difference in how I viewed the world and how I was going to exercise that incredible power of a guided missile destroyer in projecting U.S. power on the high seas.
So in 18 years at, let's say 500 grads a year, you've got, and I realize, you know, I'm butchering some math, but I mean, let's say you've got the equivalent of 9,000 people that you're competing with for commanding, like commander positions, right? How many people in the Navy get to command ships like that?
From all those ensigns in any one year right now, there's about when you start as an ensign to where you get to be a commanding officer, 1 out of 20 are actually going to achieve that goal. So
okay,
it's pretty slim pickings and a very tight process that you go through to get there.
Yeah. So, my show, this show, we a lot of times are interviewing entrepreneurs. We interview people from all walks of life, but the consistent theme is high performers, elite performers, people that do make those cuts, right? So I'm curious, to what do you attribute, and toss out all your false modesty. I want the honest answers. To what do you attribute your very rare success that got you in a position to be there when what happened, which obviously, I'm inevitably going to ask about, but before we even get into that, what do you think it is about you that got you in that position in the first place?
I think it really had a lot to do with, first and foremost, my time at the academy. I'll be honest with you, Jeff. I struggled. I struggled academically. I was not mature. I was unfocused. And so I really, for 4 years, I was having a tough time through that complete 4-year period. Mm-hmm. At the end of it, as I like to put it, I graduated in the top 90% of my class. And as I got out there to the fleet, I will tell you the one thing that I would tell anyone else out there, when it comes right to it, you ask for that key trait, it was perseverance. I went out to the fleet and I put my nose to the grindstone and said, guess what? You're now in this. You owe the Navy and the nation 5 years of hard work. Put your nose down, and no matter what gets thrown at you, you're going to take it on. You're going to push through it. You're going to learn from it. You're going to get better from it. You're going to make mistakes. And guess what you're going to do? Pick yourself up by your bootstraps. Don't whine about your position in life, and go make it happen, and do as much as possible, as well as possible, for as long as possible. And so that key trait of perseverance, I think more than anything else, is what defined that path that would ultimately lead me to command.
Well, it sounds like the Navy is a lot like entrepreneurship. Do as much as possible, as well as possible, for as long as possible, and you'll tend to get the best possible result when in its time, not when you're ready for it, but just when it's time. But that's great advice. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that, because that's something, like, you don't have to be in the Navy to apply that advice. Like, that's, so many of my listeners are entrepreneurs or entrepreneurial minded people that are maybe considering starting businesses. And I'll say it point blank. There is no success without what Commander Kirk just said. There just isn't. I mean, any success, we read the stats on lottery winners. Did you know that winning the lottery makes you 33 times more likely to declare bankruptcy in your life than not winning the lottery? I mean, it's,
I look at it and, I think everyone kind of thinks about, gee, what if I do get that one ticket? What if my redneck retirement really does pay off? And you get that winning ticket, what would you do with it? And I literally look at it, and the first thing I do is change nothing, and then figure out, what can I do to do good? And how can I preserve as much of that wealth as possible so that I can do as much good for as long as possible? And I think so many people fall into that trap where the first thing they do is look inward and say, ooh, how am I going to reward myself for what just was given to me, for what I just won? And that is not what life is supposed to be about. I mean, in this day and age, as I've gotten older, Jeff, and whether I want to admit it or not, I might be on the back half of life. I kind of look at it and say, you want to know something? You need to reach that point in life where you start saying, how can I give more back than I have received throughout my life? Because that's what's truly going to make the difference. And that's the legacy that you really want to leave behind at the end of the day.
Do you think that's something that, because that's a consistent theme that I find among, established successful people, is they're kind of in this phase of life that's around, I want to give more than I receive. But we all have these stories of impetuous youth and I wasn't always like. Do you think it's something that no matter how old somebody is, they should embrace this idea of legacy thinking and giving more than they receive and focusing on service? Or do you think that it's actually good when you're young to just be self-absorbed for a few decades and then mature into that once you're, like you say, on the backside of life?
I think you have to experience youth. I mean, there are going to be those exuberances. We've all had those moments, and some of them have ended with great joy. Some of them have ended in sorrow. Some of them have ended in regret. And in each case, you gain experience in life. And it is from those experiences where, especially those where you have made mistakes, where you can reflect back on them, learn from them, and shape your future. And as I like to put it, Jeff, as you travel along that path in life, when you make those mistakes, what you do is you pick up a rock and you put it in your backpack. And over time, that backpack gets heavier and heavier. And eventually, at some point in your life, you need to stop and you need to pull those mistakes out, those rocks. And what you do is you set them down and you walk forward. And those rocks, now when you look back on the path you've been on, they now serve as the reference points for how you're going to lead your life forward instead of wearing them as burdens on your back. And I think it's the people who have that ability for self-reflection to be able to understand where they didn't do things quite right or could have done things better, and have taken those rocks, set them down, and it's provided that reference point that allows them to now gain all those life experiences and turn around and be able to say, give back. What I started doing in my give back a year ago, and even right now, I'm an adjunct professor at the Naval Academy, teaching those young sophomores, what we call youngsters there, in a course called Ethics and Moral Reasoning for Naval Leaders. And that's how I try and give back, is from a lifetime of learning, try to teach them ahead of time, hey, these are the things you need to think about. And that's why I say this giving back can be so incredibly self-fulfilling, and it makes us better as a nation as well.
Do you, forgot my question, but I totally agree. I'm like biding my time to ask you about the incident, which I'm sure you get asked about so much, but I like to try to mine the lessons. Oh, it's really bugging me though. I can't remember. You know what it is? I know what it was. I got distracted while you were thinking because I was connecting dates and times and locations. Were you part of what was considered the Pacific Fleet?
Very briefly, that was my executive officer tour, and I never really served out there. I met that guided missile cruiser that I was going to be the executive officer on. I actually met it in Phuket, Thailand. Made a port visit, tough port visit here. You meet it in Phuket, Thailand. We make a port visit to Singapore. We make another port visit to Hong Kong. We make another port visit in Hawaii. Then we're back in San Diego, working for the next 16 months to get the ship ready for deployment again. And literally the day the ship deployed, I traded duties as the executive officer. I was relieved and was standing on the pier and waved goodbye to the ship as it left, wishing that I could have enjoyed some of the fruits of my labor over the last year and a half. But, that's how timing works out sometimes.
Well, the reason I asked is because when I was a piano player in my 20s, a band that me and a buddy threw together got hired by the U.S. Navy, and we went and played all the bases in Japan, up and down the naval string of naval bases in Japan. And it culminated with the Pacific Fleet Admirals Banquet, with all the top brass of the Pacific Fleet. That's why because I was doing dates and connecting dots, and I'm like, what are the odds that Commander Kirk was there but I guess you weren't anyway.
No, unfortunately, slim odds on that one, and we missed.
Yeah, that's that anyway. So that's why I got distracted thinking about that. But okay, so by the way, again, I just want to echo, because I'm always looking for takeaways. Do as much as you can, as well as you can, for as long as you can. Like if we stopped right now and nobody heard anything else but that, we'd be changing lives, right?
Yeah. And the other takeaway that I would also emphasize to your audience is that when I started at the Naval Academy and I stood in that center courtyard that first evening, raised my right hand with a fresh haircut and a new uniform, and swore that oath to support and defend my nation, I had no clue what I was getting into. But over the next 4 years, the one thing that literally I became steeped in is what they call the honor concept. So that by the time I graduated, you literally have this mindset of what it means to have integrity. And when I look back now and we'll get into the attack in a minute, but when that bomb went off, it literally, everything that I thought was important became irrelevant. And I needed to focus on two things. What do I have to do to save the ship? And what do I have to do to save that crew? To be able to have that sole focus in a moment like that, to have that kind of clarity, to me defined that, you want to know something? I have reached that point where my integrity is so part of my character that it will continue to define who I am for the rest of my life.
So on that note, and I want to dig deeper into that concept, because how you inculcate character how we inculcate character into ourselves, and whether or not we do, I believe, is ultimately becomes what we're defined by in life. Right. And so I want to talk about that process, but for now, on that note, can you walk us through that incident? I mean, I don't even know what questions to ask, except it's this iconic thing. Tell us what it was like and what happened.
Hey, sorry for the interruption. I just wanted to let you know you can get a free copy of my book, The Millionaire Shortcut, which shows you the fastest way to become a millionaire in the new economy. And there's a special link just for this episode in the description. So thanks for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the episode.
So USS Cole was part of the George Washington Aircraft Carrier Battle Group. We were home ported in Norfolk, Virginia. The George Washington and the majority of the battle group would actually deploy to the Middle East in late June. Because of rotation schedules, USS Cole and one other ship, a guided missile frigate, would actually deploy at the beginning of August. We would cross the Atlantic. We would operate in the Mediterranean for about 6.5 weeks. Then we would go through the Suez Canal on the 9th of October, headed toward the Middle East. And one of the things that had happened over time is we'd gone from a Navy of 4,000 ships in World War II to 600 ships at the height of the Reagan buildup in the mid-'80s to the morning of October 12, 2000. We were a Navy of 315 ships, and there was no oiler within 1,000 miles, so we had to stop at about a halfway point to get fuel. That halfway point would be Aden, Yemen. We would pull into that port that morning, make a series of right-hand turns. It was shaped like a large bowl. We would turn the ship around and moor it to a refueling pier out in the middle of the harbor. We shut down our 4 main engines, left 2 gas turbine generators running. We started pumping fuel about 10:30 that morning, expecting to be there 6 to 8 hours. And as part of routine harbor operations, we contracted for 3 garbage barges to come out and take off trash, plastic, hazmat, things that we can't dump at sea. Well, 2 barges had come out to the middle of the ship and the back end of the ship and had left when we're halfway across the harbor. What we didn't know is, and what should have happened is, they go dump trash and one comes back out to the ship and plays cleanup. We didn't know that morning that Al-Qaeda had been there for about a year, observing when Navy ships pull in, what pier they go to, what side they moor to. And this 3rd boat came out, slowed, turned by the bow, and came down the side of the ship. Contrary to what you may have read in the press, it was not a little rubber Zodiac boat raced across the harbor and rammed the side of the ship and detonated. It looked just like one of the other garbage barges. It went by, it went to the middle of the ship. And what happened in that moment is something we never trained for, expected. A waterborne improvised explosive device, 2 suicide bombers that detonated, blowing a 40 by 40 foot hole in the side of the ship. And in that singular instant, the shock wave reflected off the seabed and there was a thunderous explosion. You could feel the ship lift up, slide back down in the water, power failed, lights went out, ceiling tiles popped out. I literally came up on the balls of my feet, grabbing the underside of my desk as everything popped up, slammed back down as the ship was rocking from side to side, surging fore and aft on the mooring lines. I literally took a second. And the one thing I did is in that singular moment, everything became crystal clear. And the one thing I told myself is, you need to focus in this moment. No matter what gets brought to you, no matter how bad it seems, you must project absolute calm to the crew, get as much information as possible, make the best decision possible based on the information you have in that moment, and then go start making more decisions, because I knew they were going to come rapidly There were going to be a lot of unknowns, but I knew that the crew needed to know that, hey, I'm still here, I'm in command, and we're going to get through this. I literally went out and a young officer stepped out behind me, looked at me, and using good sailor-like language, asked me, what the F was that? And then he said, fuel, thinking like everyone else in that moment, we'd had a fuel explosion and takes
Right.
off into this gray cloud. I suddenly stopped and realized, no, nothing had been on the left side of the ship when we'd been blown up into the right except open harbor water. So something has come alongside and exploded. And in that moment, I knew we'd been attacked. I went back into my cabin, unlocked the safe where I kept the keys to all the weapon systems on the ship, torpedoes, 5-inch gun, missiles. And I pulled out a 9mm pistol, loaded it, chambered around, decocked it, 2 clips of ammunition, ran to the middle of the ship, took a deep breath as I went to head toward the port side where the blast had happened. And all I could think to myself is, okay, this might be your destiny, but if you're going to go down, you're going to go down fighting. And if you see someone that doesn't belong, don't leave an empty round in the chamber. So I took that deep breath, Jeff, and headed over. Fortunately, the first person I saw was my chief gunner's mate responding to reestablish the defensive perimeter. We leaned over, saw the hole in the side, talked to each other. But in that singular moment, I knew that what had happened was one of the security team members would come running up a few minutes later and say, Captain, that blast came from a suicide boat. The 2 other boats had left halfway across the harbor. The 3rd boat came down. It looked just like the other garbage, 24-foot center console, outboard motor. What we thought was a threat was 4 orange rafts floating alongside the ship, was not. The concussion from the explosion had blown our life rafts out. And what actually happened is there were little pieces of boat and bomber now all over the top side of USS Cole. I went to the bridge at that point, talked to the Yemeni port authorities. They got hospitals notified. They got ambulances down to the pier. They would send boats out to us. We would then make sure the ship was stable. When I went down and initially looked at the blast area, it was utter devastation on the interior of the ship, completely blown apart. And at that point in time, as I showed up into what was called the central control station, or like the nerve center for the engineering plant, that's also where damage control central is. I got a briefing on the status of the ship. Once I got that briefing, the chief engineer looked at me, even though she knew the question, she asked it point blank. Captain, are we going to lose the ship? Having built the very first one, believe it or not, Jeff, I knew that if we could contain the damage we had, we were going to be afloat. And I just looked at her very calmly and matter-of-factly and said, no, if all we've lost are main engine room number 1 and auxiliary machinery room number 2, get the flooding and shoring teams to brace the bulkheads up forward to auxiliary machinery room number 1 and main engine number 2 back aft, we're going to be fine. And the tension level went down by an order of magnitude because everyone suddenly realized, oh, the captain knows that we're not going to sink. It's not a matter of if, but how and when we're now going to save the ship. From there, I could go up and now do triage effort. So we had all these wounded up there. I got briefed on the status of the wounded. We would evacuate the wounded off the ship, and which was pretty amazing. That first day, we would evacuate 33 wounded off the ship in 99 minutes. And of those 33, 32 would survive. Absolutely phenomenal job by the crew. And so, that first day we were all on our own. That evening, we started hearing about forces coming in. And by the next morning, the British were the first ship to show up to really aid us. Then 2 U.S. Navy ships showed up later that day. Over the weekend, the FBI would show up, NCIS, Mobile Diving Salvage Unit 2, Norfolk Naval Shipyard. And this began a larger and larger footprint. And we would actually be in port. We would almost lose the ship Saturday night when my only operating generator quit. And God loves sailor ingenuity, because as they're sitting there, it's amazing. When people know that you have their back, they will do anything to accomplish the work. And one of my sailors came to me and said, Captain, we can't get the generator started because we're out of high pressure air. But we've got these 2 portable pumps that we use to fill the air packs for the firefighters. What if we took those and jury rigged the fittings and hooked them up to the air flask for the generator instead? We did that. And 22 hours after we lost power, we restarted that generator using that technique that a young sailor had come up with. So, it's an amazing job when you trust your people, they're going to be able to do these things. And so we would survive for the next 17 days at port. And eventually we would get the ship pulled out to the middle of the harbor. We'd get towed 23 miles down the coast, put on this heavy lift ship, Blue Marlin. USS Cole would be brought back stateside for repairs. But, she's still out there defending freedom, but I'll have to, there's a couple little stories that I just have to share if we think we've got the time today.
Yeah. Oh, but I think the audience would be upset at me if I didn't allow for that.
All right. So I'm sitting there in the middle of all this devastation. The wounded are all around me, and I'm at the 30-minute point. And my navigator, who had actually been up on the bridge when I first arrived up there, came down and looks at me and says, "Captain, we're sending wounded ashore, but we don't know the full extent of their injuries. We don't know which hospital they're going to. We don't know what their treatment regimen's going to be. I recommend that we send someone ashore to track them." I looked at her and said, "Great idea, Nav. Who do you recommend?" She had fear in her eyes, looked at me and said, "Sir, I'll volunteer to go." I said, "Fine. As soon as we can get a brow or a gangplank down to the pier, which is going to take a little over an hour, you're the first one off. Take one of the wounded and let us know what you need." So I'm going to jump ahead here. She would walk off the ship once the brow went down, goes into a boat, goes ashore. 2 hours later, we would get word back from her. We would send 20 blood donors ashore, as well as a handful of petty officers to track the wounded between the hospital. A French press reporter who had heard the blast called the French embassy in the capital of Sanaa, who then notified Paris, who notified Djibouti, and the French would fly a medical evacuation aircraft in that night. And they would take 10 of my most seriously wounded sailors to Djibouti. My navigator would go with them. The next day, the Air Force flew 2 aircraft into the region, one into Aden and one into Djibouti, take all the wounded, initially to Landstuhl, Germany, and back stateside. My navigator could have left with the Air Force. I never would have questioned her motives. She didn't do that. Instead, a day and a half later, she gets on an airplane from Djibouti, flies back into Aden, comes downtown and checks in with the admiral standing up the Joint Task Force, comes down to the piers, gets on a Yemeni boat, sails across the harbor, walks across the refueling pier, up the brow, and back aboard for duty. Now, the story that underlines this is called Message to Garcia. You can Google it. It's maybe a 15 to 20-minute read. And what it really is about is that when you as entrepreneurs, when you as leaders give people a job, do they stand there and start asking you the litany of questions until you finally get tired of being asked questions and go find someone else to get the job done? Or do they say, "Got it, boss, I'll go do it"? My navigator didn't stand there on the deck of the ship with all the wounded at our feet asking me, "Sir, should I take a change of uniforms? Where are the hospitals located? What do I get for transportation? How do I communicate with you? Should I take a passport? Do I need a toothbrush? How am I going to be able to manage this whole thing?" She walked off that ship wearing on the clothes on her back, goes into a foreign country, gets on an aircraft from another country, flies to a third country, and then comes back aboard for duty 2 days later. When people know that you trust them and you have their back, they will move heaven and earth to accomplish what you ask of them.
I just want to, first of all, thank you for reminding me about a message to Garcia, because I totally hear it in the story you just told. It is one of the most profound entrepreneurial, and I, to be clear, I talk a lot in my life about entrepreneurialism rather than entrepreneurship. Because entrepreneurship is like, oh, I'm an entrepreneur. I started a business. I'm doing entrepreneurship. But entrepreneurialism is a philosophy. It's a way of being in the world. And it's just as home in the military as it is in a business, right? That message to Garcia story is incredible. And yes, I will echo your encouragement to the audience. Just go Google it. There's you can read it. There's also some wonderful renditions of it on YouTube of people speaking it from stage. It's really powerful. But yeah, it's basically just about when somebody gives you a job, how do you do the job? Do you just do whatever it takes to get the job done? Or do you sit and equivocate and wait and ask permission and split every possible hair until, frankly, it would have been easier just to give the job to somebody else?
Exactly. And I think what Message to Garcia also epitomizes is that when you're out there, entrepreneurs live with it all the time. Guess what? Live with risk.
Yeah.
Manage it, but live with it and go do it. And that's really what it's about. So the second story on a more fun note is that when we got hit, the announcing system on board Cole was knocked offline. The backup system failed. The battery backup for both failed. So no one could tell the crew what had happened, where to go, and what to do. And for a year, we had trained, and I had pushed that crew and kept raising the bar, training, hoping, and praying that this moment wouldn't come. And now here we were, right in the middle of it. The crew fell back on their training with no one telling them what had happened, where to go, or what to do. They divided into one of three groups. What do I need to do to save the ship? And they went and did it. What do I need to do to save my shipmates? And they did triage. And what do I need to do to prevent another attack? And they became part of the security team. All that went on. Well, over the 17 days that we were in port, we got the announcing system restored. And we have a stereo system we normally set up for picnics when we get underway and we're out at sea for extended periods of time. That was set up back on the flight deck. And as those 4 Yemeni tugs gently pulled us into the middle of the harbor, we had the stereo system set up. The announcing system had been restored. And as we started getting towed out of Aden Harbor that morning, Jeff, I looked at my XO and I said, XO, play the first song. And the first song that we played getting towed out that morning was the Star Spangled Banner, because I wanted our national anthem echoing across the harbor to send a signal to the Yemenis people that despite what had happened to us, we were going to leave with our head held high. But as we're headed out of the harbor and as the song ended, we're going by a pier sticking out with 2 Yemeni Navy patrol boats. The crews from those 2 boats had gotten into their dress uniforms, came down on the pier, and as we were towed by, came to attention, saluted us, rendering honors. And as professionals, we returned those honors to them. Once clear, I turned back to the XO and said, XO, play the second song. Second song that we played, Star Spangled Banner again. You bet. Second time, though, Jimi Hendrix version. Then we're on the long straight stretch headed out. I'm feeling pretty good as the captain. I lowered my guard and said, XO, I want a good cultural signal of American rock and roll. Tell the crew they can pick anything they want to play. And in that defining moment, I learned my most valuable lesson as a commanding officer in just how much leash you give a sailor in a moment like this, because that was not music that came out of those speakers. They had turned the stereo system all the way up. They had turned the speakers all the way up, and it was vibrating noise. I lost my cool, looked at the XO, and using sailor-like language, I turned to him and said, XO, what the is that? Get that shut off right now. He gets wide-eyed, tears out of the bridge, doesn't call me up till halfway through the song. And I'm like, XO, what took you so long? He said, well, sir, the ladders or stairs on the port side as I was going down was damaged, and I wanted to take my time because safety is our number one priority, sir. So he asked if I wanted to shut off the song, and I said no. But that song was by a great American named Kid Rock. And what was the song? American Badass. So while the captain may have wanted a cultural song in a way that only a sailor could do, my crew was sending a very powerful signal to these people themselves that morning. And let me tell you, to this day, I remain proud of them because Kid Rock would come to a benefit concert and raise money for the fallen from USS Cole. So he's a great American out there. But sometimes you just need to think a little outside the box and give your opportunity for your people. When you have these moments like this, you need to kind of understand what they've been through and give them an opportunity to blow off steam. And as leaders, you have to be able to have that ability to recognize those moments and realize, let your guard down a little bit. It's going to be okay. Let them express themselves.
Well, the thing that, I mean, that's a hilarious story about, and I'm super glad that they'd made that choice, whether you approved of it at the time or not. I think it was just the right choice. But I will actually say, I was playing back in my piano days. I was playing piano in the lobby of the Four Seasons Hotel in downtown Houston, Texas. And Kid Rock was sitting alone in the bar having a drink and came over and talked to me, gave me a very nice tip, and was just a very kind and gracious person. So I too have a fondness for Kid Rock. But you know, one saying that came to mind when you were telling that story is about And I read a lot. I would say I'm a aficionado of Navy SEALs, right? I read like books that come out by SEALs, and I'm just really interested. And I have a good friend who's a SEAL for a long time, and I'm really interested in that just naval cult. Like, I like grit. I like people that do really hard stuff, you know? And one of the things I hear, I know is popular in SEALs, I'm sure it's true across all, you know, military, is this concept that you don't rise to the occasion, you fall to the level of your training. Well, Commander Kirk, I don't know if you noticed, but we're out of time.
Holy cow. You know, I could go on with these discussions all day long, because it's that event provides such a rich tapestry of so many things that went on. And was every decision perfect? No. But what I tell people is, look, we in the business world are not politicians. When you make a decision based on the best information you have and you get better information, change it.
Yeah.
Make another decision, make a better decision, and don't be afraid to change it. I don't care how many times you have to do it, because you have to get from here to there, making sure that your business survives and that all the people who have trusted you to get them through it know that you're going to be able to do it.
You know, I remember reading on that note, I remember reading an article in Harvard Business Review that talked about how Fortune, I think it was Fortune 100. I mean, it was looking at people that make monumentally impactful decisions that impact hundreds of thousands of people, you know, at a time. And the way they make decisions, the way Fortune 100 CEOs make decisions, is typically the threshold of information is around 60%. That once they have about 60% confidence in a decision based on the available information, they're good. They're ready to make that decision, because they know the danger in waiting for 100% certainty. The opportunity cost is greater than the risk over time, accumulated over many decisions. The opportunity cost of always waiting till you have certainty is so much greater than just making decisions based on what you know at the time and the ability to do so.
Absolutely. As you'll hear a common saying, and I'm sure you've heard it more than once on your shows, perfection can be the enemy of good enough.
Exactly. Well said. Good note to end on. Commander Kirk, thank you so much for your time. I'm so glad and grateful to Philip for introducing us. Are you actively, I know, you know, you have a number of business ventures going. Are you actively promoting anything in the market that you would want my audience to steer to, whether it's content or training or anything?
Right now, no. It's been kind of a very quiet year. You know, the one thing that I still do is that, you know, I'm still active with Kepler Speakers, but we're actually pushing out into a new business model there, where we don't just show up, give a speech on stage and do it. We're actually looking at engaging with businesses to say, not only will he come and give the speech, but he will help flush out like each of my 5 pillars of leadership, where I talk about integrity or vision or, you know, personal accountability, you know, trusting your people, and then having professional competence. Let's delve down into those and literally spending hours to a day or more with companies to really help them walk through, whether it's at that supervisor level or at that C-suite level, where we can actually engage with them to help them do that, because those are the key things.
If you loved that episode, then you're definitely gonna love this one. Check it out.
The marketing game is 100% rigged against 99% of business owners in this world right now. Like a casino, the house always wins. And you may have a hot hand and win a few times with your business, marketing your business, but on the average, you're gonna lose 100% of the time.